looky what we got here, folks. 1986 Monte Carlo SS in Australia. I got myself one of those temporary permits, and it's time to drive this little puppy home. Yeah, baby! We got the Monte SS in the shed, ready to go up on the hoist. I have got this table full of parts that I'm going to throw at this thing. You want to see what I'm going to get up to? Fireys are now on scene and the police have been called as well. One painted lower control arm, bushes ready to install. Let's get into this. First thing I'm going to do is take this little flapper wheel and just clean out these mating surfaces here. I'm not taking any material off, I just want to take that paint off that I put in there. Just like that, all nice and cleaned up. Now a little bit of anti-seize on these surfaces. Just help that bush slide in a little easier. Now I've got a hydraulic press over there, but I'm gonna give it a crack, just tapping these in with a hammer. Gonna start off with the long skinny one, pop a socket over top of it. Let's see how we go. There we go, that's seated. When it seats, you can actually hear a little bit of a note change when you're hitting it. All right, I'll rinse and repeat that on the other 3 bushes. All right, now that I've got all 4 bushes installed in the lower control arm, it's time for the ball joint. On this one, I'm gonna press in, not whack in. Put a bit of lube on that mating surface, pop the ball joint in like so, put the steel plate over it like that, and use the press to press it in. Make sure that's going in square. Now I'm just slowly pressing it from side to side. I took that big plate out of there because I just couldn't see whether it was running down true or not. This way, going side to side, I can see it inching down. All right, that ball joint's all pressed in there nice and tight. Before I put my grease nipple on the bottom side, I am going to put the dust cap on the top side. And there's just one thing you got to know about these dust caps. They got that little groove here. That groove goes inboard so that when you're greasing the ball joint and grease squeezes out, that's a little relief valve and it shoots the grease away from the wheel. That's the theory anyway. Let's go around and make sure that that snap ring is cinched in place all around the perimeter. That's done. Grease nipple on. There it is, one fully rebuilt lower control arm. For the amount of hassle that was, I think I'd just buy replacement control arms with the bushes and the ball joint already mounted in it. That was a bit of a ball ache, especially cleaning all the grease and rust and shit off of this thing. Yep, just not worth it in my opinion. Now before I go ahead and install all of this suspension componentry, I have got a very clear view and clear shot of the fuel pump. Nothing's wrong with this one, it's working perfectly fine, but it's 38 years old now, and while I'm in here, I might as well throw a brand new pump in there. Let me undo the fuel lines and the mounting bolts and pull that out of there. And what do you think the possibilities are of that fuel pump lobe being on the base circle and not on the top of the lobe? I got a 50-50 chance, but I don't like my luck. Another example of an imperial component on this vehicle. This is a 5/8 and my pipe spanners are in millimeters. Judging by the way that fuel pump is springing itself out, I'd say I did not get lucky on the base circle of that cam. Got him. I've decided I'm going to take this plate off as well. There's just a lot of oil around here and I don't know whether this thing's leaking or not, but if it is, I'll replace the gasket. The other thing it'll allow me to do is it'll allow me to get that rod out that runs on the fuel pump, and I can put a good bit of grease on it so it'll hold up inside of that hole. There we go, there's our push rod for the fuel pump. Okay, got my push rod all greased up. Pop that in place and see when it's greased, it stays in place. It'll slowly creep down, but it'll stay up there long enough for you to get your fuel pump in. Small spattering of Gorilla Snot on that. Let that set up for 5 minutes and we'll put our plate in. All right, that's been about 5 minutes or so. Very careful with these little 3/8 bolts. I don't want to break those little suckers. Push that fuel pump rod back up again. It's worked its way down a little. Get my fuel pump. I think I might be lucky. That rod might be just far enough around on the base circle. Let me see if I can get these bolts started. Yeah, I surely can. Sensational. I did put a little bit of grease on the plunger, on the tip of the plunger on that fuel pump. Nice one. Fuel delivery line, fuel return line. Now I'll clean these threads up. It's got old thread tape on it, which I will replace. Let me get rid of the old stuff first. Put some new thread tape on and just make sure I don't get it over the end of the pipe. That would be tragic. Okay, I'm going to start the car up and check that sucker for leaks before I put all the suspension back in place. Because if there's an issue with that, I want to deal with it now while I can get to it. Give the pedal a couple of pumps. Looks good, I don't see any leaks. Reassembly time. And the first thing I'm going to do is pop these upper control arms into place. Just got to make sure that my shims don't fall off of the two studs that are mounted onto the frame. Alright, I got these two bolts done up that mount the cross shaft to the frame, but I haven't done up these ones yet on the ends of the cross shaft. You need to do those up with the weight on the vehicle, because when that compresses, it compresses that rubber bush in there. And then that rubber bush actually acts as part of your suspension. Next piece of the puzzle is the lower control arm. All right, that lower control arm's in place. Those bolts aren't tightened up. They're just hanging there loosely. Again, we need to tighten that up when there's load on the suspension. Pop on our spindle on the bottom and run the nut down. I guess you could do either the bottom or the top. It doesn't really matter which order you go in, but I've had luck with the bottom, so I'm gonna stick with my luck. Put a bit of grease on the upper ball joint, spindle as well. Now our coil spring. I put a couple of bits of tape just to hold this coil spring rubber on in place. And I've got the old deadly coil spring compressor, which I'm going to compress the spring only a little bit, just enough so that I can fit it in there and get the jack underneath it here, and then take the load off the coil spring compressor with the jack. All right, bomb loaded. Okay, I got the coil spring in place. Let me jack this control arm up and take some of the load off of that spring compressor. Okay, line up my upper ball joint. All right, let me get that bolt on. Ah, that's a good feeling when that bolt goes on. Now I'll release the pressure off that spring compressor. There shouldn't be a lot on it now. That's it. And let me fish the bits out of here. Okay, we can get our trolley jack out of the road now. Now we can put the shocky in, and that'll stop that bomb from going off. One shocky. Pop that top nut on to hold it into place. And let me see if I can compress it enough to start those bolts, or whether I have to put my trolley jack underneath of it. Trolley jack. That should be enough to start those bolts. All right, the bomb is diffused. Now, time to do up these castle nuts and to put the cotter keys in. That's got him. One brake backing plate. Now, before I put these rotors on, I don't know what shape these bearings are in. And also, that seal on the back of this hub is just starting to weep a little bit. You can see a bit of discoloration here from a bit of oil getting past it. So I'm going to replace the bearings and that seal. It's easy enough and it's cheap enough. There's the outer bearing. Flip that over, pop the seal out. Boy, that popped out easily enough. There's our inner bearing. Yeah, those races look like they're in really good nick. I reckon those bearings were fine. I probably could have got away with just replacing that seal. But anyway, it's all pulled apart now. Don't let a job like this scare you. It is not difficult. The only specialty tool you need is a punch. And you know what? You might even get away with a screwdriver. So what I'm doing now is I'm driving out the race on the outer bearing. There's little grooves. You just got to find the sweet spot. There's one. That's it. That race is out. There's a tiny bit of scoring inside of that race, but it's not too bad. Anyway, I'll feel better that I replaced it. And then you do the exact same thing with the other race, except for you knock it out from the other direction. There she is. Again, nothing wrong with that race. That one's in beautiful shape. Okay, there's my new race. I'm going to drive that one in. Start it like that. Now, there's a few ways you can drive that sucker in. You can use your punch and run it along, but run it on an angle like this so that you don't mar that mating surface of the bearing in the race. Second, you can take your old race, set it on top of the new race, and use that to knock it down. Third, you can use one of these race driver innerers, and that's what I'm going to use. You can get these things off of ePray for next to nothing. But here's a tip if you're going to use your old race. When you're driving that down in, you'll get to the point where the new race is flush with the housing, and if you continue to drive it with the old race will get jammed into that housing as well. The way you get around that, take your angle grinder, cut this sucker in 1/2 so that it springs a little bit, and then when you drive it in, you can pull it out with your fingers. That's my hot tip, but I'm going to use my ePray race driver innerer. And you'll be able to hear when it bottoms out because the note will change. Just like that. Race number 1, driven. Race number 2, driven. That's what the race driver kit looks like. You just got different size pucks and you got your handle. Now the not so fun part, greasing bearings. I do it by hand. I don't have one of those fancy bearing packers, but by hand, you pop the grease in your palm and you move your bearing over top of your palm, which sort of drives the grease in between the rollers. And you know when you've got it done, because the grease starts to pop out the other side. When that happens, get yourself a little bit more grease, rotate your bearing slightly, and then start it all over again. Grease coming out, rotate, and you do that till you go around the full 360 degrees around the bearing, and your bearing is packed. All right, that bearing is fully packed around the complete perimeter. Just smear this excess grease over top of the rollers. Put a bit of grease on that race. Bearing in, lovely. Now my seal. I'll put a bit of grease on the mating surface, on the rubber mating surface, and just a little bit on this, on the outer surface as well. Help it slide in. Okay, now I'll pack my outer bearing, which is just a tiny little thing. Pop that into the race, reassemble the rotor back on the car. Okay, hub assembly. Back on the car. Beautiful. I have mounted my sway bar ends in place when I had this wheel off. When I get the car down on the ground, I'll show you the sway bar properly. All right. Washer. Spindle nut. Okay, I'll tighten this spindle nut up till it seats and until the rotor has resistance and isn't turning. It's not freewheeling very well anyway. And I'll get my knockometer. What I'm doing here is just bedding that bearing. See that? It's spinning a little bit freer now because I bedded that bearing like that. Tighten them up a little bit more. Knock them again. And now back that nut off so that it free spins. That's the spot right there. One split pin. That whole bearing replacement and hub rebuild process would have taken me 10 minutes if I remove the filming. So like I said, it's not hard at all. Don't let a job like that scare you away. Now I'm going to take my rusted out manky janky bodged dust cap and replace it with a new one. Done. Brake caliper back on. This meaty monster of a super caliper. Next, I'm going to replace all of that crap. I have all the replacement parts. The only bits I need to reuse are these sleeves that the tie rod end bolts into. Now I've measured the total length of that to get my toe in approximately the same as what it was before. I will get a wheel alignment once I finish this work, but that'll get me pretty bloody close to where I need to be. All right, let me pull these sleeves off and give them a clean up. All right, let's pop our 2 castle nuts in place, just to hold this thing so it doesn't clune me. Now I've got the car back on the ground and I'm doing up the 2 bolts on the cross shaft on the upper control arm, and then I'll do up the 2 bolts on the lower control arm. It's amazing how much these bushes contribute to the suspension of the vehicle. I was just bouncing the car up and down before I had these tightened up, and it was actually quite bouncy. And once I get these tightened up, you'll be able to see that the rubber in these bushes, when it's compressed, aid in the suspension by a pretty big margin. More so than I ever thought. One more oomph, and I think I've got it. All right, 3 more bolts to go. All right, I got those 2 upper control arm and 2 lower control arm bolts done up. And I got to admit, when the car's on the ground, it is not easy. But now, the suspension is doing what it should. Without those control arm bolts tightened up and those rubber bushes doing their thing, you'd bounce the car and it would continue to bounce a little bit despite the fact that there's brand new shocks on it, and you could compress it a lot more. Now it's a lot more difficult to compress because of the resistance against those bushes. All right, I've got all the steering components installed now. I took measurements of all of these lengths on the old setup, transferred onto these new ones, and it hasn't worked. These tie rods must be a little bit different length than the original ones. So my toe in, toe out is all out of whack. So I'm going to adjust that up now using the tried and tested tape measure method. For example, this measurement here was 445 mil on the old setup, and on this one it's about 430. So about a 15 mil difference. It's not a lot, but it does make a big difference on the toe in. All right, all my bolts are torqued down. All the cotter keys are in place for the split pins. Now we'll grease. Now the sway bar is all installed. I've got new bushes in there, and I've got new bolts as well because the old bolts were a little bit manky. Sway bar ends are bolted in and they're just put in loosely at the moment. I drop the car onto the ground so it's got full weight on the sway bar, and then I'll tighten those up properly. All right, now I'm going to adjust the toe in on the vehicle because I've replaced those tie rod ends, and I'm just using a string line to do that. So I'm at the back hub here, and the string line is 40 millimeters from the center of this hub. And if I run up to the front, the string line is also 40 millimeters from the center of the hub. So I know that string line is square to the car. Now if I measure at the back of the front rim, I'm 22 millimeters. And if I measure at the front of the front rim, I'm about 26 millimeters. So that means I've got 4 mil of toe in on this car at the moment, at least on this wheel. I'm shooting for 3 mil of toe in. So what that means is I've got to back that rod off on the tie rod end and push the front of this tire out ever so slightly, only by 1 millimeter. If I come to the other side of the vehicle, again at the back, I'm at 40 millimeters from the rear hub, and the front hub is 50 millimeters. That means I've got to push that string line in 10 millimeters. But I can't because that string line is touching the back of this tire. So what that means is this is towed in far, far too much. Got to back the nut off on the tie rods to kick the back of that tire out to allow me to move that string in 10 millimeters so that I can get my hub measurement correct. Then I can measure my toe in. And this is how I adjust the toe in. You just spin this little collar around the end of the tie rod, and it'll either push the front of the tire out or pull it in. I've done my adjustments. I've got 23 mil on the front. I've got 26 mil on the back. That's 3 mil of toe in. That's exactly what I was looking for. I'll tighten these 2 bolts down, lock that collar in place, go over to the other side, rinse and repeat, and then my bodgy front end alignment will be done. One thing I forgot to mention is I've got the tires sitting on these little dollies. So when I'm adjusting the toe in and toe out, they can kind of pivot on here. Okay, just got back from my test drive. Need a front end alignment, which doesn't surprise me given
given I've changed everything in that front suspension. So I got to do that before roadworthy. I've got a leaking power steering pump down there. I'm going to throw a rebuild kit into that. I got a sticking thermostat. The temperature jumps up to about 220 degrees, and as soon as it hits 220, boom, the thermostat opens and it drops like a stone. So I'm going to replace that thermostat. And that indicator lens has got a crack in it, so I'll replace that indicator lens. Let me get the shitty jobs over with first, and I'll start with that power steering pump. All right, I got my Succulator 2000, and I'm going to pull as much of the power steering fluid out of there as I can, just so it's not quite as messy. Not very red, is it? It's more brown. Hey, it's nasty. All right, I'll loosen this AC compressor off so I can get the belt off the pulley on the power steering pump. I'll tell you, this car keeps you guessing because it's a weird amalgamation of imperial and metric bolts, and you just never know which one you're gonna need at the time. This AC compressor is metric, 15 mil. Alrighty, I got the power steering pump out. Just got a bit of petrol here and I'm cleaning off the housing because it's been leaking for a century and it's just full of shit everywhere. And then we'll pull this sucker apart. It only had 3 bolts holding it in, which were connected to the brackets, the 2 belts, and the 2 lines, the high pressure line and the low pressure line. Power steering pump's all cleaned off on the outside. Now I'm going to take these 2 bolts off and get this reservoir off of the pump itself. And here's where it throws us a little bit of a curveball again, because everything that holds this pump together are now all imperial. So that one is a 1 inch, and this one here is an 11/16. Well, after a fair bit of whacking, I think I've got this sucker off. There we go. What happens, you get a little layer of corrosion on this lip, and it's really difficult to get that pump out of there. But we got it. I'll clean this pump reservoir up first and then set it aside, and we'll pull a pump apart. Okay, I got my rebuild kit here, and as I pull these O-rings out, I'm just going to make sure that the rebuild kit O-rings fit, because if they don't, I got the wrong kit. And that wouldn't be the first time that that's happened. That one looks good. Okay, it's a good start. Right here is the little magnet that catches all the metallic crap that comes on this thing. It just sticks to this little pad here. That's not too bad. I've seen worse. Here's the big seal that seals against the case. That one was cactus. Now there's another seal just here. Hard as a rock. Now this little guy is kind of wedged in there behind an O-ring. He's a hard one to get out. All right, so I whacked it upside down and it came out. So let me just reverse that procedure for a second. Flip that over. That was the piece there that I was trying to get out, and it gets caught under this O-ring here. That's one of the wear faces there. That's not too bad. I can't feel any lip or groove on it. That's the next piece, and that little groove and these 3 grooves, they face the top. So you can get this thing in upside down if you're not careful. Now these little guys are the little vanes that sit inside here. That little circlip there that holds this impeller on, that's a real bugbear to get out. You got to get little screwdrivers in there and little levers and just try and pry it out. But I got it. So let's get that impeller off, and that will mean that we can pull these pulleys out now. Got him. There's the little seal in the end of the snout. Mine wasn't actually leaking. That's pretty cool. And what do you know, the replacement seal fits too. Got him. That's it. That housing is completely disassembled. I'm going to clean that little sucker up now, and we'll reassemble it. All right, I've got the new bush in here, and I'm just going to press it in. There's the bush. I've got a washer, and I've got a bolt to sit on top of that. This is the bush that the pulley shaft runs in. Looks like she's running in true and straight. It feels like it. The press isn't binding up. We'll just keep on pushing. Make sure that washer isn't going to foul. There she is. That looks pretty good. Okay, let's fit the pulley. Oh yeah, beautiful. No play in there either. Excellent. That's what the old bush looks like. Looks like it's made out of aluminium or something like that. Okay, oil seal time. lube up the mating face of that oil seal. Now I'm going to put this bracket on first before I go ahead and assemble the pump, because these bolt heads will sit in behind that pulley, and you can get them, but they're just a real bugger. Whereas right now they're open and swinging in the breeze. So I'll take advantage of that. All right, I've put that bracket on. It's important that I put that on now, because as soon as I pop this pulley on, those bolts for the bracket are hidden. Lovely. Okay, pump reassembly time. All right, a little bit of ATF in the body of the pump. All right, I got that circlip in there without it shooting across the shed. Call that a win, a big win. Now I'm gonna pop the first O-ring in. I've got a mixture of a little bit of O-ring grease on it and some ATF. I don't know why, it just seemed like a good thing to do at the time. All right, pop that guy in. That little arrow and these three little slashes were up at the top. I've got my little vanes here in the ATF. Just pull them out with a little magnet, and they just slide into each of these grooves on this impeller, just like that. Okay, all those little vanes are in. Next piece is the, I don't know, I guess it's a little bit of a cap that sits on top of the impeller. Just make sure that's lubed up. And one of the O-rings sits along that mating surface. Excellent. Next comes our spring. Next O-ring, a bit of O-ring grease. Wonderful. Got the little spring in there now. Now this little cap, a little bit of fluid on it. That's the one. I'm gonna try and make life a little bit easier for myself and just hold this guy in with a C-clamp while I fit this snap ring. That's it, that's got it. Okay, now I've got my magnet. Pop that in place right there. Got this little check valve-y guy. And I've got my 3 seals. One goes there, one here, one over here. Now this big Hujonga O-ring. Bit of O-ring grease. That one goes right around the perimeter of the body of the pump. And that seals up against the reservoir. There we go. Reservoir in place. Pop that in there so we don't get any shit in there. That's ready to be mounted back on the car. Let's see how long it takes my Sunsong seals to start leaking. Okay, I am draining the coolant, and I'm either going to have a really good day or a really bad day, depending on whether I can get those thermostat bolts out of the block. Fingers crossed. I did go ahead and replace that indicator lens. There's the brake there. I didn't film it. It's just 3 Torx bits holding it in. Piece o' piss. I got a crack here in the nose cone. There's a little bit of spider crack here as well. I'd say the previous owner must have impacted something here and made this crack all happen. And who knows, maybe that's when that indicator lens got cracked as well. Anyway, I'll have to address that when I do the body work on the car. All right, let me dig out this thermostat. Get this air cleaner out of the road and possibly a few of these hoses. I think I said in this video already, but no, this is not a 350. It's the original 305 with a 350 air cleaner on it. Okay, I'm gonna dig out this thermostat housing, which is under a few of these hoses. Just get them out of the road to make my life a little bit easier. Okay, I think I can get to those 2 bolts now. All right, I'm gonna disconnect this upper radiator hose. Get that up out of the road. Okay, bolts, don't break on me, please. Oh, that made a funny noise. Oh, I think I got the first one. Oh. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, number 2. Be good to me. Ooh, that's tough. Oh, okay, I'll get a breaker bar. Come on, baby. Come on, just crack. Oh, it moved. It moved. I don't know whether the head's twisting off or not, but it did move. Still can't get it with a 1/2 inch. Gotta go breaker bar again. Oh, man. Tighten him back up a little. Loosen him back off a little. Okay, let me try again with the 1/2 inch ratchet. Yes. Got it. Oh, that makes me so happy. That could have really been a bad day if those broke off. Come to Papa. There we go. Whew. All right, Mr. Thermostat. Come on out of there. There we are. That is reading as a 180-degree thermostat, but that is not what it is doing. It runs up to about 220 degrees before she slams open. So I'll replace them with another one and hopefully solve that little bit of an issue for us. I'm putting in a 160 in here. Okay, now I'll drop my housing down in. I've got the top of the housing all gooed up. And I've got about 1/3 of the bolt covered in Celastic as well. Just not sure whether those bolts go down into the water passage in the manifold. So, because I don't know, I've glued them up. Okay, I'm gonna tighten these bolts down. Not FT. So when future me takes this off, because this thermostat is cactus, I'm going to be able to get it off. Okay, I'm going to replace this radiator hose as well. It looks like it's in pretty good nick, but what the hell? You know, I've got this whole top end of the cooling system off. I might as well replace it. The other thing I've got is I've got a new header tank. That one's all discolored. It should look like that. So let's pull that out of there and replace that. All installed. My, that looks the piece, doesn't it? It is time. Fill up the coolant, throw some heat into this engine. We're up to temperature. Thermostat's open. No leaks. Let's call that a win. All right, I got the car back from the front end alignments. Drive it straight as a die now. Beautiful. Got myself some personalized plates. Done a couple of little jobs. I replaced the cigarette lighter with this USB port. Don't use a cigarette lighter. That'll charge my phone. I hooked up that under bonnet light. That's one of those mercury switches, so when you close the bonnet, the light goes out. All right, so I'm gonna pop that up on the hoist. I'm gonna hit the underside with some Lanatech rust preventative. I got an engineer coming over later this week to do the LO2 compliance. Then I've got a roadworthy to get, then she's going to be registered. All right, I got myself some of this Lanatech steel seal, and I'm going to do the underside of the car. The car's got this black body deadener all underneath of it. That was on it when I got it. What I don't like about that stuff is the rust can continue to grow underneath of it because it's a reasonably hard coating. This Lanatech is really liquidy, and it tends to soak in a heck of a lot better than those heavy coatings. So I'll go along, do the entire underside of the car with this stuff, and then we'll call that finished. It's the little things like this that thrill me and fascinate me.
Fireys are now on scene and the police have been called as well. We were coming from Greenbank towards Springfield. These guys were coming from Springfield towards Greenbank. They blocked it up, crossed over the double white line, wiped the side of my car out. Jill's going to the hospital in the AMBO. Abrasions and all the rest of it.